There's a ton of noise out there. So how do you get decision makers to pay attention to your brand? Start a podcast and invite your ideal clients to be guests on your show. Learn more at sweetfishmedia.com.
You're listening to B2B Growth, a daily podcast for B2B leaders. We've interviewed names you've probably heard before, like Gary Vaynerchuk and Simon Sinek, but you've probably never heard from the majority of our guests. That's because the bulk of our interviews aren't with professional speakers and authors. Most of our guests are in the trenches leading sales and marketing teams. They're implementing strategy. They're experimenting with tactics. They're building the fastest growing B2B companies in the world. My name is James Carberry. I'm the founder of Sweetfish Media, a podcast agency for B2B brands, and I'm also one of the co-hosts of this show. When we're not interviewing sales and marketing leaders, you'll hear stories from behind the scenes of our own business. We'll share the ups and downs of our journey as we attempt to take over the world. Just kidding. Well, maybe. Let's get into the show. Welcome back to B2B Growth. I'm your host for today's episode, Logan Lyles with Sweetfish Media. I'm joined today by Tom Pisello. He is the Chief Evangelist at Mediafly. Tom, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Logan. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. Well, Tom, we're going to be talking about how B2B buyers are really cold as ice, as you put it, as we were chatting offline, and some ways that sellers can actually take advantage of some of the nuances of the buying process and the way those have changed to warm up those B2B buyers. Before we jump straight into that, though, Tom, I would love for you to give a little bit of context, tell folks a little bit about yourself and what you and the team at Mediafly are up to these days.
Absolutely. So I'm Chief Evangelist at a company called Mediafly, and we're a sales enablement company helping buyers better connect and engage and communicate and quantify the unique value to today's buyer. Before that, I started a company called Alineian, and I've been a serial entrepreneur for about the past 20 years. And Alineian was very focused on tools that would help you to quantify return on investment, total cost of ownership, and diagnose value for companies. And before that, I was a Gartner managing vice president, so an analyst at heart. Technology background, but have been in business and the business of making better sellers for the past 20 years.
I love it. There is such an opportunity to level up the selling profession. It's something that I'm personally passionate about. So I am really excited to have you share some insights, some statistics, as you mentioned, being an analyst at heart with your time at Gartner, Tom. But let's open things up. I've got the tune in my head of the Cold as Ice song. I actually can't recall who that artist is, but tell us a little bit about your thoughts here in this analogy of B2B buyers being cold as ice.
Yeah, it was from a group called Foreigner in the late 70s when it was on their first album when they came to be. And cold as ice. So I like to use that moniker for today's buyer and how they've changed. First of all, they're much more in control. They've got access to a ton of information about you, your competitors, solutions, research. And they really are in control of the buying process more than ever. Before, we were in control of a lot of the information as sellers. Mm-hmm. And we really had a lot of exclusive knowledge, exclusive insights. And now a lot of that control has shifted to the buyer, so we have to work harder. The other thing that's important is that they're more cautious. When they're making a purchase decision, literally their job is on the line. And the organizations, too, have become more cautious. A lot of them have been burnt by big investments in the past. And that's where a lot of the buying by decision committee has come into play, where Gartner's latest statistics show for an enterprise purchase, so a large purchase by an organization, it's not 6, 7, 8 buyers. It's actually more like 10 to 13. So that's absolutely significant. And then buyers today are much more economic focused. They're frugal. They want to know where every dollar is being spent and make sure that the precious budget that they have, both resources as well as money that they have to spend on solutions and services, that every dollar is spent wisely. And there's a lot more scrutiny from finance and from procurement on every dollar that's spent. So that's where the cold as ice comes into play. In control, cautious, and economic focused.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of research out there that I've been coming across lately that reaffirms this idea that people will make decisions more often to avoid loss than they will to receive gain. And so if that is being almost amplified by these factors within their organization, then we have to pay attention to that as sellers. So as much as buyers have changed, you alluded to some things there, Tom, but what are your thoughts on, the process as they go through the buying cycle, the way that has changed and what sellers need to keep in mind as well?
Yeah, so the buyer's journey is really a lot more difficult than it has ever been for buyers themselves to navigate through. So you'd think with all of that information and even how easy it is to configure and customize and purchase solutions and get them up and running, that it would take shorter than ever to make a purchase decision. More informed buyer, it would be shorter.
Right.
Well, if we look at decision economics that you indicate, and books like Think Fast and Think Slow from Daniel Pink discuss this well, more choices and more information can actually lead to more indecision. And we're seeing that. So buying journeys are taking much longer than expected, with 84% according to Gartner reporting that. And so a buying journey that used to take 6 months is now taking twice as long. So it's 12 months. If it was 9 months before that your typical buyer's journey was, it's taking more like 18 months. And so these decisions are taking longer. And a lot of that is because there are more choices. There is a lot more information. And the other thing is that there, as we said, there's more people involved in the decision. So it's harder to gain consensus. And when we look at kind of what's taking so long, Gartner found that there's a lot of information gathering, there's a lot of information processing. Because there is more information, the buyers are spending more time on a task called deconflicting. So kind of trying to make heads or tails out of all of the information they're getting from all of the vendors and all of the sources of that information. What's credible, what's not credible. And that's consuming 2/3 of the buying journey time on gathering, processing, and deconflicting. And worse, not only is it leading to buying journeys that are taking twice as long, but 94% of survey participants recently from Gartner said that they've participated in canceled buying journeys. So they go through all of this work internally, all to end up in a purchase that doesn't happen. And as a seller, you're sitting on the other side of this saying, how could this journey be taking this long? I've provided information. I've tried to help, facilitate that journey. And we've spent a lot of time kind of deconstructing the journeys in marketing and in sales to try to understand them better and try to facilitate, but they're taking twice as long. And then a lot of them are ending in stalled deals in the pipeline, which is the evidence that we see as sellers to this breakdown in the process. And it has really led to a de-evolved buying process.
Yeah, absolutely. So I love the stats that you're bringing to this to really drive home the importance of how we need to think about what's happening on the other side of the table, quote unquote. And I think a lot of people see these as just massive challenges for selling in the B2B space today. But as you and I were talking offline, Tom, one of the things I picked up in what you mentioned in talking about this is that there are some unique opportunities here. There are some challenges, yes, but there are some very specific opportunities that B2B sellers have because of all of these things that are playing into the dynamics of B2B sales today. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I know I gave a lot of bad news at the beginning, but there's a ton of good news and opportunity in this when you think about it. So if you're able to help the buyer in that journey, in that de-evolve process, help them in the gathering, the processing, the deconflicting, help them to overcome the cautious and skepticism and frugality that they've got, help that economic focused buyer. I mean, there's an enormous amount of opportunity there. Part of the challenge, though, I think, is that the traditional seller has resisted change in a lot of instances. They still show up with more of a canned PowerPoint about their company and products and services and features and price. And they're not focusing on the things that will differentiate them and the content that will actually get that buyer's journey unstuck and really help to facilitate that journey. So, when we look at sellers, we're still surprised at some of the statistics. And when we do drive-alongs, the surprise is reaffirmed in that there's still a lot of show up and throw up with PowerPoint. There's a lot of talk about the company, the products and the services, and then leaving it up to the company that you're selling to figure out what to do with that solution. And instead, there hasn't been the shift over to what buyers care about most, which is helping them uncover challenges, helping them to understand where they should be in terms of benchmarks and insights. And instead, it's a lot of sales pitch content. And, we've got this moniker of no pitch. We definitely need to move from pitching to purpose. And to do that, you really have to take a much more evolved approach. So in the face of a de-evolving buying journey, we think that the way to do this is with an evolved selling approach.
It's story time again, and we're talking about search engine marketing. Today, I'm going to tell you about a challenge within Pelican Case's B2B division. Pelican needed a partner with deep B2B expertise that could get them a massive bump in leads from their pay-per-click campaigns without increasing spend. After vetting a handful of agencies, they decided to go with Directive Consulting, a B2B search marketing agency located in Southern California. Directive took on this challenge by refining their targeting and building custom landing pages for their advertising efforts. Once implemented, they saw a 208% increase in conversion rate. Needless to say, Pelican Cases met their initiative. And I have a hunch that Directive can get these kind of results for you too. So head over to directiveconsulting.com and request a totally free custom proposal. That's directiveconsulting.com. All right, let's get back to this interview.
I love it. And as you and I were talking offline, Tom, you told me a little bit about this evolved selling framework, and it's broken down into 4 aspects, being inspiring, influential, interactive, and intelligent. And I love all of these characteristics for sellers and for sales in general. Let's touch on each one of them briefly and how it ties to, overcoming the challenges of, B2B buyers being as cold as ice, going back to the top of the conversation, and the changes and the challenges in the buying process. Let's start with that inspiring aspect.
Yeah. So right in the beginning, these 4 I's are important. So inspiring is the first of those I's, and you've got to look and say, is the content that I'm going to deliver in the engagement with the customer in that last mile, in that moment of truth, is it relevant? Is it engaging? And more so, will it inspire them to take action and change? It's not going to be that traditional PowerPoint. It's not going to be that information about your company, your products, your services, how fast you've been growing. Look at all the great logos we have. Look at how attractive our founders are. That's not the stuff that's going to differentiate you, and that's certainly not the stuff that's going to inspire the buyer to change. Instead, can you focus on the challenges that the buyer has and helping them to realize how important these challenges are to address, perhaps even uncover some hidden needs. And the Challenger sale methodology focused on a lot of this. It's really that emotional connection to the prospect, to unsettle their status quo, to communicate and quantify for them that there's a high cost of doing nothing, and to inspire them to do better and to change.
Yeah, that cost of doing nothing speaks to that loss aversion that we were talking about earlier.
Exactly.
So I think that makes a lot of sense. Tell us about the influential aspect that you're advocating for here in modern selling, Tom.
Yeah, so now once you've got them unsettled, you've got to get them to do something. And now it's about influencing that buyer's journey. So being able to get them the content they need to gain consensus and to influence the buyer's journey within the organization. So here's where kind of traditional content management comes into play, aligning the content that you have with the different steps in the buyer's journey, and making it very easy for the seller to be able to proactively, and that's the key, provide content to the prospect that's going to facilitate that next step in the journey. Because remember, 2/3 of the journey they're wasting on what? On gathering, processing, and deconflicting of content. So how can we make our sellers enablers of that journey? to almost anticipate the needs of the buyer at the next stage, and to give them succinct pieces of content that'll help drive their effectiveness.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So moving to the third I then is interactive. Are we talking about, the way that we're presenting the content here in this third piece of the framework there, Tom?
Yes, absolutely. So the interactive piece is about not just providing them with content, but collaborating. And what we like to do is say co-create value with the customer. So it's the ability to take advantage of interactive tools to help discover and assess where they are today, compare them to their peers and benchmark them so they know kind of where they're at and where they ultimately could go, and competitively where they are. And then being able to quantify the cost to do nothing and the value of change here at this point. Things like return on investment tools, total cost of ownership tools, diagnostic assessments, all fall into this interactive category, where it's no longer about just giving them a data sheet or an infographic. Videos are powerful, but they're passive pieces of content. And so we think that in an evolved selling process, and to get customers to kind of navigate this journey quicker, you've got to interact with them, collaborate, and co-create. And it's a co-creation of value that interactive is all about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, really driving the points home of what is the future going to look like for us, bringing beyond, okay, I see what you've accomplished for my peers and those like me, but what is it going to look like for me, especially as you put it in the last mile of that buying process. So let's bring it home, Tom. Let's talk about the intelligent aspect of this 4-part framework, the 4 I's of the evolved selling framework.
Yeah, exactly. So everyone is hot on artificial intelligence and machine learning right now. And what's a good framework without that, right, today? And but for good reason, right? You've got to better understand what it is that's working or perhaps not working. What does this look like today? Today, our marketers are content machines, right? I swear they're paid by the pound of content that they produce. And it's all really good. I mean, the quality of the content, everyone kind of that we work with really gets content marketing, and they're working hard to produce insight and thought leadership pieces, and everything. But it's really proliferated incredibly. And so the hard part is what content works or doesn't work. Is that 100-page deck you're providing from sales being used, not being used? What are consumers, what are the prospects consuming is the second step. So what's being used and not used? And then what do buyers actually resonate with? And what are they reading or perhaps not reading? What are they interacting with or not interacting with? And then ultimately, how are those pieces of content that we're sharing and that are being consumed, how are those moving the needle? Are they impacting the win rate? Are they impacting the deal size? Are they impacting how long it takes for the prospect to make a decision? So those are the key pieces of intelligence that ultimately need to be collected. And then machine learning can examine those 3 key measurements: usage, consumption, and ultimately impact, and then start to be intelligent about it. So knowing the next best step or the next best piece of content, where you should be investing more or less, is going to be automated ultimately. And the evolved selling model and framework has that as the last step, because we think that insights and understanding into what's working or not working is essential. And then taking advantage of AI and machine learning to help tune the right content for the right selling situation is essential.
I love that. I mean, we've given a lot of tangible things for salespeople and sales leaders to be thinking about in the process. And I love how you've brought it home, Tom, with thinking about sales enablement and marketing, thinking about these 3 aspects of the content that sales is using and looking at these 3 different aspects: the usage, the consumption, and the impact. So, Tom, I think what you're talking about here has delivered a ton of value for people in sales, sales operations, sales enablement, and marketing as well. If anybody listening to this, Tom, would like to stay connected with you or learn more about what you and the team at Mediafly are up to these days, what's the best way for them to reach out or learn more?
Yeah, just reach out to me on LinkedIn. that would be great. There's also a value marketing and selling group that we have set up on LinkedIn to talk about these topics. And then most importantly, if you're interested in evolved selling more, I do have a new book coming out in a few weeks on Amazon that will be called Evolved Selling. And we'll go through this research and insights and methodology in a lot more detail.
Awesome. Well, we will link to that as well as your LinkedIn profile in the show notes, Tom. Thinking Fast and Slow, another resource that you mentioned in today's episode, we'll link there in the show notes. That's definitely one both sellers and marketers should be checking out if it's not already on your Amazon list or your Audible wish list. Maybe it's just I'm a podcast guy, but I listen to all my books these days, so big fan of Audible. So we'll link there in the show notes as well. Tom, this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining us on the show today.
Thank you, Logan. Thanks so much.
We totally get it. We publish a ton of content on this podcast, and it can be a lot to keep up with. That's why we've started the B2B Growth Big Three, a no-fluff email that boils down our 3 biggest takeaways from an entire week of episodes. Sign up today at sweetfishmedia.com/big3. That's sweetfishmedia.com/big3.